Just over a week ago, Lewis Hamilton sparked debate in the F1 news circus when he stated in an interview with Italian media that all of his teammates in Formula 1 have been better than all of Max Verstappen's. For Lewis, this statement was one premise contained within a wider argument which posited that while Max and Red Bull's dominant streak over the last 2 seasons is worthy of praise, it's no more impressive than Schumacher's, Vettel's or Hamilton's own period of successive championships. Now, Hamilton's perspective here is kind of in equal measures valuable, insightful, but also inexorably tied to his personal viewpoint in the sport. And one thing that many fans noticed within his arguments was the statement that all of his teammates have been harder than all of Verstappen's, not just on average, but in every single instance. And for this to be true, you would have to be certain that in all the F1 history books, Heikki Kovalainen and Valtteri Bottas's F1 careers would be viewed more positively than Daniel Ricciardo's, which to me and many others is a flawed and inaccurate premise. And this is basically where the analytical rhetoric surrounding this quote ended up. If we're being objective and fair, then yes, Lewis has had harder teammates than Max Verstappen on average. Alonso, Button and Rosberg are all top-tier Formula 1 drivers, world champions who pull Lewis's average up. And while Max Verstappen's strongest teammates, Ricciardo and Sainz, are also high-level racing drivers, they don't have the world championships that Lewis's have. Lewis has seen greater challenges over longer periods of time, on average. But Max is just over 12 years younger than Lewis and ahead of where Lewis was at his age, both in win and championship numbers. So we're really just kind of nitpicking facts and stats between 2 extremely talented racers who have both shown talent at the highest level across their Formula 1 careers. 2 legends at different stages answering provocative questions from the media. These were pretty much the observations of Jenson Button, who, when asked to weigh in on this at last weekend's Goodwood Revival, emphasised that while over Lewis's career his statistics are more impressive, he would be more fearful right now of taking on Max, who's in his prime. So let's do some number crunching of our own then. I took all the current drivers who have had at least 3 season-long teammates in their F1 career, popped them into a spreadsheet and assigned each driver with a score out of 10. Then I averaged them out and came up with this graph. And it's important to remember here that while all models are wrong, some of them are useful, and I've included a margin of error to hopefully factor in people's individual biases and who they rate as their favourite driver. It's not a perfect graphic, but I've done my best to come up with some useful data. So let's take a look at the graph. What can we see? Well, it looks like Hamilton's claim stands up, at least the more reserved one, that on average his teammates have been harder. His bar is higher than Max's, but not by the huge margin he portrayed to the media. The weak point score of Kovalainen pulls his overall average down. But for Fernando Alonso, while his teammate list includes names like Kimi Räikkönen, Jenson Button, and of course Lewis Hamilton, the fact he's been such a mainstay in the F1 paddock since the start of the century and changed teams so many times means that a lot of good but not great drivers a la Liuzzi, Fisichella, Van Dorn pull down his average, but this in no way takes away from anyone's estimation of how good Fernando Alonso is, despite his teammate difficulty score not being so high. And to some extent, this observation about Fernando undermines this entire paradigm of thinking by ranking drivers based on the difficulty of their teammates, and this is what was echoed by Christian Horner in his responses to Lewis's original comments. Comparing drivers to their teammates is important, but it's only one of many methods of comparison. Both teammate relative performance and performance relative to the rest of the grid should be accounted for when painting an overall picture. And actually the highest bar on our graph was Carlos Sainz, who benefits from being teammates with Verstappen, Leclerc and Norris at different stages in his career. And he came up through the Red Bull Academy, so at every stage this is going to be a benefit. If you're performing well, you know that you're going to be performing well against other strong drivers as Red Bull seeks to continually improve their lineup. And second in our graph was actually Lando Norris, who beats out Hamilton to finish P2. Between Sainz, Ricciardo and Piastri, Lando Norris has always had close competition inside the team garage to learn from, and this has to have been a big contributing factor to how exactly he became one of the strongest drivers currently on the grid. Now Lewis came third in our table, basically proving his original point, but there's very little between our top 5, and next in the list is Lance Stroll, who's benefited from being Sebastian Vettel and Fernando Alonso's teammates, and has always had 2 giants pulling up his point score. But what Stroll being so high on our list also proves is without the proper context, this stat is effectively meaningless. It also depends how you perform against those teammates, not just how hard they are independently. And funnily enough, it's Alex Albon who rounds out the bottom of our rankings table, who was at one time Max Verstappen's teammate. This is because despite getting a high score from being partnered with Max at one stage, Latifi and Sargent were firmly second fiddle to him inside that Williams team and towards the overall back of the grid that year, so it pulls the score down. So overall in this debate about teammates, yes, Lewis was pretty much right, but it's quite a complex issue when we look out to the rest of the grid. And like I said earlier, it not only matters how good your teammates are, but how well you do against them and the rest of the grid. And all of this has to be factored in. You have to have good race pace, good race management, good media management over a sustained distance of time to establish greatness in Formula One. This is what Lewis has done, this is what Max is doing now, it's what Fernando has done, it's what all the great champions have done. But what did you think of Lewis's comments and the use of teammate comparisons in driver evaluation? Intuitively, it feels like it makes plenty of sense to compare drivers first and foremost to those with the same equipment, but there are some unavoidable qualifications in this argument here too. Let me know what you think. Thank you very much for watching. Make sure you subscribe to this channel for content from us here at the Crash F1 team, and check out our website crash.net too for unbeatable coverage across the racing world.